Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava, Batra, Daf, Ayin, Hey. For the most of today's daf, it will be a continuation of what we were doing yesterday and the day before, but we will get back to both at the very end of our daf. So I just want to go back one small thing at the very end of yesterday's daf. We had the Siman, Yamim, Gabriel, and Ra'ev. So we're going to get to those three. The first was Yamim, and they're going to be all three statements of Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, although the second one says Rabbi Yonatan, but many people correct it to Rabbi Yochanan. In fact, most of the statements today are going to be quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. I don't know what to make of that, but I will point it out. So he quoted this pasuk. I kind of rushed through. It was the end of the daf, but I wanted to just clarify here. Or just add. It says, he quotes a pasuk, Ki hu yamim yisadav al naharot yechoneneha. Basically means the world was created based on the waters and on the seas. In other words, it sounds like first God created the water, or maybe you could explain it like that, but the basis of the world was created on this. And what the drasha is saying is it was the world, but it was all the Yamim and Naharot were in Israel specifically, and that the focus of the creation was toward Israel. There's a lot of sources that there's two approaches, like about the creation of the world, and maybe this is good to think about for Rosh Hashanah. It's the creation of the world, minded toward Israel and the Jews, or not necessarily, more like a universal theme, and then there was Israel and the Jews. So this is obviously saying that Israel is sort of the center here, and it was all centered there. Okay, moving on. Last line of Ayin Daled Amud Bet. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yonatan, or maybe Rabbi Yochanan. When Rav Dimi came from Israel, again, these are statements, he brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia. Atid Gabriel asuk knunya im Leviathan. We're going to go back to the Leviathan. I strongly recommend, even though Iyov is a hard book, the end, it's very important. And today I did a lot of opening of the Tanakh, which was very important here because we're going to quote a lot of psukim. We don't always have time to do this, but I really think it's important to mention here. The psukim about the Leviathan, okay, at the end of Sefer Iyov, mamash at the end, after this long book of all these discussions between Iyov, his friends, God, all these discussions back and forth, God basically starts answering Iyov in chapter 40 with this whole thing about, there's these great creatures, basically God says, and it's perhaps one of them is talking about the Behemah, Baharei Elef that we talked about, and then it starts talking about the Leviathan. Okay, and it says all sorts of things about the Leviathan, which are basically from the middle of chapter 40 all through chapter 41. And then when it finishes this description of this awesome creature, which we're going to see that the commentaries are going to kind of flip some of these verses, because really what the psukim are saying is, do you think you can do the following? Like the next pasuk we're going to quote right now is, what? Do you think you could capture the Leviathan with a rod? Do you think with a rope you can press down its tongue? Meaning, of course you can't. The Leviathan is way greater than you. You have no power whatsoever. Okay, you'll see where the Gemara is going to take this all. But then what's really interesting, and this is why it's important to open up the Tanakh when you're learning Gemara, then in Perek Mem Bet, after God has this long speech about the awesome power of these two giant creatures, and really a lot of it about the Leviathan, which goes all the way into chapter 41. Chapter 42 starts, Vayani Yovet Hashem Vayomal, Yadati Ki Kol Tuchal. Now I understand that you are all powerful. He said, okay, and it's basically Iyov. He has just a few psukim, and he says, I'm with you, God, and I understand that you're above everything, and that's really the message of the book. And so I wanted to just first of all read it in context, and I think it goes back to this thing we were talking about, and we're going to see it all throughout. They're going to quote from Yeshayahu today and from Yechezkel, these verses that are really against the ava, against haughtiness. Okay, it's these sections. It's funny, I learned Sefer Yeshayahu in ninth grade, and I moved to a new school, and it was all Hebrew, and I didn't really follow what was going on the whole beginning of the year. But the one thing I remember from that class that I eventually, finally understood by the end of the year was the word ga'ava, haughtiness, and that like Yeshayahu is all, you're all haughty. I mean, there's a bunch of different themes, but that's one of the main themes. And the psukim specifically that are quoted are in the context of that, and also in Yechezkel, there's a section. I mean, there's sections all over the prophets about it, but it seems like almost everything we're going to learn today having to do with the Leviathan and these all-powerful things and awesome. And it's all about how God is it's all under God's control, and we're just minor beings, and we should not be haughty. We talked about it also yesterday in terms of the theme of we're in these chapters about buying, purchasing, having power, having money, all that really it all comes from God, and remember that. So that I think is really the main message of today's daf, and we'll see it throughout. So back to what we were talking about. In the future, Gavriel, why they got to Gavriel, I don't know, but Gavriel, the angel, is actually going to do a knunya with the Leviathan. What does that mean? He's going to have a hunt with the Leviathan, and eventually he will capture the Leviathan. How do we know this? Well, it's kind of funny because the pasuk says, as I just read before, you can't do that. But the point is, somebody else will. Okay, and that's the idea. This is a reference to Gavriel. Again, many of these psukim were taken out of their simple meaning. But again, this theme we've been talking about that I just mentioned, but even Gavriel needed the help of God. Even though Gabriel was an angel, still is an angel, it's still not going to help him unless he has God's help. How do we know this? Shene'amar ha'oso yigash harbo. This is also in Iyov chapter 40. Okay, that the one who created it will pull out his sword. Okay, meaning only God is going to have the power. So Gabriel will do it, but with the help of God. Ki'ata Rav Dimi, third statement of the Rav Dimi on Rabbi Yochanan, that was the Siman Yamim, Gavriel, and Ra'ev. B'sha'asha Leviathan Ra'ev, this is again the almighty powerful Leviathan, when he's hungry, Motzi Hevel Mipiv U'Martiach Kol Meimot Shebamtzula. This is again going to be from a drasha on the Pasuk in Iyov, which on that chapter, he's going to, when he's hungry, he spits out this hevel, this stuff from his mouth, which basically is going to heat up. It heats up everything underneath the ground. Okay, it creates a huge ruckus. Again, talking about how awesome this creature is. Shenemar yartia kasir mitzula. Okay, it will boil up like a pot the depths. V'il malei machnis rosho legan eden. Now, if few ways of how to understand this, if it hadn't put its head, in other words, where does it do this? In the Tahom, in the depths that are under Gan Eden. If it wasn't in Gan Eden, wow, we'd all be in trouble, because the smell of the hevel that comes out of the mouth, it's like the dirt also, right? Hevel is bad stuff. It's sort of a hard word to translate into English, really, because it means a bunch of different things, like nothingness, but also like heat and, okay, but basically it's going to spit out the stuff which has a terrible, awful smell. But because it was under Gan Eden, there's beautiful smell in Gan Eden, and that's going to basically, that fixes the bad smell. Shene'amar, how do we know this? Yam yasim kemerkacha. Okay, now the simple reading of this is merkacha is like a rokach is the one who makes in modern Hebrew, it's a pharmacist, right? Someone who mixes all different things together. The simple reading is it's about the Leviathan makes the water like a big mixture, a big mess, right? Like the power of the Leviathan kind of messes up the waters. But it's understood here as the water will be used as a merkacha, the water under Gan Eden, like it'll be merkacha as like a concoction that has a beautiful smell to it, which will basically get rid of that bad smell of the Leviathan. Similar to what we talked about before, the sar of the water, right? The officer of the war, however you say, translate the sar of the water, but was basically killed in the water, right? And then the smell, similar. When the Leviathan, that was when the Leviathan is hungry. What about when the Leviathan is thirsty? It makes huge furrows in the water, and not just like when a boat goes and there's the wake of the boat, but we'll see in a minute. How do we know there's going to be this wake of furrows? Acharav yair nativ, there will be like a path that will be lit up in the water, which is this wake here. But Amarav Achabar Yaakov, the continuation of that pasuk again. This is the Iyov chapter 41. Ein tahom chozer le'etano ad shivim shana. And this wake is going to last not like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, but it's going to last 70 years. That's how great the power of the Leviathan is. Shene'amar yachshov tahom l'seva. The end of that pasuk is right. It'll make a nativ, a path. And then afterwards, the tahom, yachshov tahom l'seva, will be considered like a seva. Now, what's seva? Old age or age. Ve'ein seva p'chuta mishivim. You're not considered a seva until you're at least 70. So for 70 years, this is going to stay. That's what we learned from that pasuk. Again, these are taking the psukim out of their simple meaning. Okay, so that was the third statement of Rabbi Yochanan that was quoted by Rav Dimi about the Leviathan. Okay, the first one wasn't really about the Leviathan, but the second two were. Amar Rabba Yochanan. Atira Kadosh Baruch Hu la'asot su'uda letzadikim mibsaro shel Leviathan. Now we're going to talk about the future and what will happen in the future. So we made reference to this in the words of Gabriel, how eventually this Leviathan will be captured, and when it's captured, and this goes back to what I mentioned about the sukkah, the sukkah that we're going to make from the skin of the Leviathan. We'll get there in a minute. First, we're going to talk about the God is going to make a meal for the righteous people. In the end, who's going to benefit from the killing of this Leviathan? The righteous people. And that's really the idea here, right? That the righteous people in the world to come will be the ones who get the most reward. And what's going to be their reward? They're going to be able to eat this big Leviathan that was basically all powerful and couldn't be conquered in our world, right? But in the world to come, it will be conquered. Shneamal, how do we know this? Now, again, totally taking this pasuk out of context, the pasuk reads like this: Yichru alav chabarim yechatzu ben knanim. This is a rhetorical thing. Just like before. Do you think, now yichru is usually from to sell. You think the chabarim, which are the merchants, are going to sell it, and yechatzu ben knanim, they're going to cut it up and divide it among the Canaanite peddlers? No way. In other words, a Leviathan will not be able to be sold in the shuk like regular meat is, okay, or anything, right? Fish, well, for sure not. But the way they're darshing this is, again, it won't be done in this world, but it will be done in the next world. But they don't understand Yachru as sold, but Ein kara ela seuda. They say the word shoresh kara, besides meaning to sell, it also means to have meal. How do we know this? They quote a different pasuk. Shenemar v'yichal lahem kera gedola v'yochlu v'yishtu. Okay, it's a pasuk in Sefer Melachim Bet. Anyway, there you see kara means meal. And who are chabarim? If not, chaverim. We know chaverim are talmidei chachamim. Ve'en chabarim ela talmidei chachamim shneamar, and they quote a pasuk from Shiur Shirim, hayoshevet beganim, which is the doda, right? She's sitting in the gardens. Chaverim makshivim lekolech. The friends, which are the talmidei chachamim, are listening to your voice. It's so beautiful. Hashmieni, I want to hear your voice. So here you see the chaverim or talmidei chachamim. Again, it's not the simple reading of that pasuk, but that's the drashan, that pasuk. So chabarim must be like chaverim, which is talmidei chachamim, which again means they are going to, in the end, yichru alav chaverim. They will eat a meal from this Leviathan in the future. Bahashar and the rest, what's going to happen? Okay, now the assumption is, I guess there won't be enough tzaddikim to finish all the meat of this giant creature. So now we get to the end of that pasuk. It said, what was the end about the Knanim? Yechetzuhu ben Knanim. Now here they're assuming this could only be merchants, because what else are Canaanites if not merchants? So they're going to sell it in the shuk of Yerushalayim, in the marketplace. Shene'amar yechetzu ben Knanim, ein Knanim ala tagarim. They don't think here it means Canaanite merchants. They just think it means merchants. Like Kananim is another word for merchants, peddlers. Shene'amar Kanan biyadom was named Mala ashok ahev. There's a negative pasuk about Kanan, and he's always tricking people. This goes back to all the sugiyot about tricking. La shok ahev. Okay, this is right. They love to basically oppress people by tricking them in the marketplace. But you see here, Canaan is associated with merchants. And the parallel here is socharim and Knaanim, and therefore must be merchants. But Amar Rabba Yochanan, second statement about what is going to happen in the future with this Leviathan. Now, let's talk about it. So the Leviathan with this giant creature, what are they going to do? They're going to basically take the meat. Tzaddikim are going to get it. The rest will be sold in the shuk. Okay, they don't really say what's going to happen with the money for that. That's not really of interest. But I think the point is there's going to be left over, and that they'll sell. The next thing is, what about the skin of the Leviathan? So Atira Kadosh Baruch Hu, and this is where we get it from. Okay, there's this custom. People have the last suda and the sukkah, and they say, Yehi Ratzon, that next year will be zocheh to eat from It's actually, there's a problem with the girsa there. You can look at it. I forget the wording. It sounds like you're going to eat from the sukkah of the Leviathan. It's a little bit unclear. Some people say it's actually like a mistake in the way we say it. But anyway, what it says in the Gemara is that you'll have a sukkah from the ore of the Leviathan, okay, for the tzaddikim. Again, the righteous will benefit from the Leviathan's ultimate conquering of the Leviathan. Shenema. Now, how do we get this? And here we're going to see the source for this. So if you do this meal next year, you can quote this coming year, which is not so far off. You can quote this Gemara and where the source is. Hatimale besukot oro. Again, it's this rhetorical question. What you think you're gonna be able to build your sukkot with the skin of the Leviathan? Of course not. Okay, but again, we're going to understand this as, but in the future, the tzaddikim will. Zacha osin lo sukkah. Now, we're going to talk about different levels of tzaddikim. This is something that's going to come up in another section. If you're worthy, you'll get a sukkah made from it. Lo zacha osim lo tzaltzal. If not, we'll make a covering like a tzel. Covering, shenema ubitziltzal dagim rosho. This is the continuation of that pasuk. Hatimale betzukot oro ubitziltzal dagim rosho, and you'll make a covering with its head, right? But now they're going to say, well, if you're not worthy enough, you won't get a sukkah, you'll get a covering. Zacha osin lo tziltzal. So like we just said, if you're worthy, second level worthy, you'll get the tziltzal. Lo zacha osim lo anak. If not, you'll get a necklace, like a choker kind of thing. Shenemal v'anakim l'gargorotecha. Now again, these are all rhetorical psukim in that same chapter, okay, which basically is going to say, or those same chapters, I should say, because some are from, this actually, one second, no, this one pasuk is from Mishlei. Ki levayat chen hem l'rashecha v'anakim l'gargorotecha. Now they darshan here, livyat chen livyatan, okay, and there's this connection of livyatan that will be anakim l'gargorotecha. There'll be these chokers around your neck. So now they say, right, so that's the next level. So zacha osin lo anak. Every time they go back and they say, okay, so if you're at the next level, you'll get that. Lo zacha osin lo kamiyah. If not, you'll get an amulet, which is much smaller, right? You'll have a chain with a little amulet from the Or of the Leviathan. Shene'emal. Now here's back to Iyov, chapter 40. Now the beginning of the pasuk is hatischak bo kitzipur. What, you think you'll play with the Leviathan like a bird? V'tikshirenu l'narotecha, and you'll tie it around your young women, meaning like a necklace. So here they say, that means in the future, people, whoever is at the lowest level, will get it tied around their necks like with an amulet. It will be an amulet. What about the rest? After we divide up, okay, so now we're going to basically have a meal for all the tzaddikim with the meat. The rest of it, we're going to sell in the shuk. The skin, with the hide, we're going to make sukkot for tzaddikim. We're going to make shades for people less worthy, these choker necklaces, less worthy little amulet. What's left, because there's still going to be left because the Leviathan is gigantic, well, what are we going to do with the rest? From here, we're going to get to Jerusalem in the future and a whole description of what's going to be Jerusalem, what's going to look like in the future. And you're going to see the light shining from the Or of the Leviathan is going to shine you're going to see it in the whole world. Now here's a classic method of drasha. It says, there's a pasuk from, I think Yeshayahu, chapter 40. The goyim will go in the path of your light, but they take the word orech with an aleph and they switch it to an ayin and they say leorech to your hide, okay, which means it's going to be the hide of the Leviathan. And they will basically, the hide of the Leviathan will light up. They do like a double drasha, or, and that will light up and people will see it all over. Now, if we're talking about Jerusalem in the future, we now start talking about other psukim which talk about what's the glory of Jerusalem in the future. V'samti kadkod shimshotayach. Kadkod with a kaf in both places, not a kuf. Often kod is a Hebrew word, but this is kadkod, which they don't know what this means, so we're going to have to darshan it. Shimshotayach are your pinnacles, which means basically we're talking about the walls of Jerusalem in the future. Okay, here now we're darshaning a pasuk from Yeshayahu chapter 54. Again, describing Jerusalem in the future. I'll read the whole pasuk. Samti kadkod shimshotayach u'she'arayach la'avnei ekdach. Okay, your sha'arim will be from these stones. We're going to talk about that soon. And all your boundaries will be from beautiful stones. So Amar Rav and Shmuel bar Nachmani pligi tre malachi barakia. It's an interesting line. We don't usually get this. There's a machloka between two angels in the heavens, Gavriel and Michael. We go back to Gavriel. The Amrela, some people say tre amorai barava. Okay, it's either two angels or maybe two amoraim in Israel. Uman in which ones? Yehuda v'Chizkiyahu b'nei Rabbi Chia, two brothers. Yehuda and Chizkiah, the sons of Rabbi Chia. Chad amar shoham, v'chad amar yashpeh. What is kadkot? Is it shoham, which is onyx, or is it yashpeh, which is jasmine? Amar lu HaKadosh Baruch Hu lehavi chedenu chedenu. It was such a good machloket. God said it will be like both. It's an interesting concept here that either the angels argue, which maybe makes more sense, that God then said, oh, I'll do it like both of you, or even possibly two Amoraim argued, and God said, well, I'm going to do it like both of you. And that's why, now, how do we get to this? Because Kad Kod, first of all, it's saying there's a reference to a pasuk in the Tanakh, which is interpreted later, right, by God to mean this. But anyway, Chidain uchidain, that's the Kad Kod. Kidain, like this and like this. Basically, it's going to be both, made of both onyx and jasmine. Ush'arayich lavnei egdach, that's the continuation of that pasuk. Ki hati yativ Rabbi Yochanan v'kadarish. This is like Rabbi Yochanan. We can now hear a story, one of these Talmudic stories which end in someone's death. Maybe I shouldn't have given away the punchline, but we'll see as the story goes on. Rabbi Yochanan was darshaning, and he said, "Atira kadosh baruch hu lavi avanim tovot u'margaliot shem shloshim al shloshim." He was basically learning this pasuk. The sha'arim will be made from these special stones. So Rabbi Yochanan said, God is going to bring these glorious stones that are gigantic, 30 by 30 cubits, and God is going to basically, right, create, chisel out from this a gate, the gates of Jerusalem. This is what the entranceway to Jerusalem is going to look like. It's huge, 30 by 30 stone that's carved out, height of 20, length of 10 cubits. A Talmud comes over, we don't get his name, but he says to Rabbi Yochanan, he makes fun. He says, we can't even find a stone, a beautiful stone like that, the size of an egg of a dove. What, we're going to find these gigantic stone, 30 by 30? I don't believe this. Okay, back to our stories. One day he was on the sea where you see awesome things. He sees this vision of angels. They're chiseling out these beautiful stones. Exactly the size Rabbi Yochanan was describing. He said to them, what is this for? God in the future is going to put these in the gates. We're getting them ready. Until the Kameh to Rabbi Yochanan. So he goes back to Rabbi Yochanan, all excited. He says, Amarle, drosh Rebbe, l'chana eli drosh. Tell me more drashot. You are worthy of darshaning. You know why? Kasher amarta ken ra'iti. Exactly as you said, I saw. Wow, you're amazing. Amarlo, reika. Rabbi Yochanan says, you're such an empty person. Oh, right? It's just a word of insult in those days. Ilmale lo ra'ita lo ha'emanta. If you hadn't seen, you wouldn't have believed. Milaglega devrei chachamim atay. You're someone who mocks the words of the rabbis. Natane Navbo, he looked at him, right? That look that kills. V'nasal galsha atzamot, and he turned into a pile of bones. Okay, interesting story, right? Obvious lesson of don't mock the words of the rabbis. Meitive. Now we bring a difficulty because we said that the gates are going, now we get into a numeric thing. The gates are going to be 20 high and 10 wide. Now, this could be a bit of a problem with the source we're going to read. In the Torah, there's two sections about the tochacha, the bad things are going to happen. They all start with the good things that are going to happen, right? If things are good and you follow my way, this will happen. So one of the things that's described in Vayikra, in the section of this section, is one of the good things. I'm going to bring you back to Jerusalem and you're going to be standing tall. Rabbi Meir, right? How tall? Rabbi Meir says, Matayim Amah. People are going to be 200 cubits tall. Okay, that's really tall. I think the average height of a person is about 4 cubits, something like that. 5, maybe. I think it's 4. Not very tall, right? But in other words, whatever, that's the way we are. So imagine 200 cubits, that's really gigantic. Kishtei komot shel Adam Rishon. How do you get to that amount? Because there's a drasha about how tall Adam Rishon was. Apparently he was 100 cubits. Again, it's a drasha. And from that, in the future, everyone's going to be 2 times Adam Rishon, right? It's like taking a frame of reference of some amazing number we have and doubling it. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, Mea ama, 100 cubits only, okay, which is still a lot. Keneged hechal v'kotalav, because the hechal, Rashbam says in the second temple, the hechal is where, right, the shulchan and the menorah and all that, and also the Kodesh Kodeshim was within that. It had 2 stories, and the 2 stories together added up to 100 amma. So he says, we're not learning it from double the size of Adam Rishon. He learns it from the hechal. Where would you get that people are going to be the height of the hechal? Well, it says, our daughters will be like angles that are, or like something that are etched out from like the hechal was. Okay, it's a way of talking about how great things are going to be, and they're going to be the height of the of the house, so they'll be 100 cubits tall. Now, if everyone is 100 cubits tall, or let's say 200, let's go with the 100, how are they going to fit through a gate that's only 20 cubits high? So that's the problem. So now they say, oh, Rabbi Yochanan was talking about the carving out of the stones. What he must have meant was for the windows, for air in the gates, but not the doorways. The doorways will obviously be tall enough for the people to go through. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We're in this, again, in a slew of statements of Rabba, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan about the future, what's going to be. Every righteous person is going to have 7 chupot, 7 coverings. Shneimar, almost like protection. Shneimar. Okay, now we're switching to Yeshayahu chapter 4. And here we're going to later quote another pasuk from here. It's also about the future in Jerusalem. Ubaha Hashem al kol mechon har Tzion va'al mekahea anan yomam ba'asham v'noga esh lahava laila ki al kol kabel chuppah. Okay, so there's a debate about the 7 here. Well, exactly the 7 are, but there's 7 things here that each one's going to be a type of chuppah. So from this pasuk they say, because it says al kol kavod chuppah, so they say from here they learn they say the wording at the end al kol kavod chuppah, that means not only is everyone going to get a chuppah, but it's actually a little dangerous, and you'll see that unfortunately things that exist nowadays that we would hope wouldn't exist in the future are still going to exist, and we'll get there in a minute. But al kol kavod chuppah means you're going to get a chuppah according to your level of kavod. So there's, just like we saw before, there's tzaddikim of different levels that will benefit from the Leviathan skin. Here also, there's going to be different levels, and you're going to have a different level of chuppah. It's going to be noticeable differences, which is going to obviously cause jealousy and, tension like in our world. So now they're going to say, Asham b'chuppah lama. First, we have to explain why smoke. It doesn't sound very good. You have a chuppah of smoke. So, Amar Rabbi Chanina, shekol mi she'einav tzaroch b'talmidei chachamim, anyone who is stingy with talmidei chachamim in this world, ba'olam hazeh mitmalot einav asham la'olam haba. His eyes will be filled with smoke in the olam haba. What they seem to mean here is you'll have a chuppah that kind of emits something like ashan, okay, whether it's actually smoke or not, but it's going to basically go into the eyes of the people who didn't treat you well in the olam hazeh. Okay, it sounds like a bit of an unpleasant image. Esh b'chuppah lama. What about fire? Why fire? Amar Rabbi Chanina, this is also very negative. This is, like I said before, everyone's going to be burnt by their neighbor's chuppah, because if your chuppah is not as nice as the next person's, that's going to burn you basically and embarrass you. Oila lo tabusha, oila lo tachlima, right? What an embarrassment it's going to be for you. And we have something similar. When Moshe goes to give the reins over to Yehoshua, God says to him, "V'natata mehotcha alav." Okay, you'll put, this is at the end of Bamidbar, you'll put from your glory onto him. Now, it doesn't say natata hodcha, your glory. It says from your glory. From always means, you might remember, we've darshan this a lot of times. From always means to say some, but not all, which means that you can already see where this is going, right? Below kol hodcha, Yoshua is not going to get all your glory. And what happened as a result? So this Canaan of that generation said, Moshe's face is like the sun. They could see. He didn't have the same hod. His looked more like the moon, which is obviously less bright than the sun. What an embarrassment that was for Yehoshua. So in a sense, these things seem great. You're going to get chupot, you're going to, right? Yehoshua is going to get the glory of Moshe, but it's not going to be the same. And, that difference is noticeable. Amar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina. Esil chupot asa. Okay, if we're already talking about chupot in the future, now we're going back in history to all the way back to Adam HaRishon. And now we're going to quote these psukim, which again, I told you, a lot of the psukim we're quoting today are in the context of this haughtiness and the terrible haughtiness that existed. This specifically are psukim in Yechezkel that are addressed to the king of Tzor, which the Gemara is going to call him Chiram, because that's the king of Tzor that they know in the Torah from Shlomo. But if you're learning it in Yechezkel, you wouldn't necessarily think it was Chiram. The Gemara does call it Chiram, though. And we're going to see that these psukim, so what he is told, okay, I'll read you just for a minute. In Yechezkel chapter 28, it says, Ben Adam sa kina amelech Tzor. I want you to do a kina about him after he dies, va'amarta, like a lamentation. And I want you to tell him this. Began Eden, okay, I'm skipping a few words. Began Eden Elohim Hayita. Okay, you were in the Gan Eden of God, which is obviously a reference to Adam HaRishon. So we're going to have to connect. What is Chiram? Why is or Melech Tzor? But the Gemara is going to call him Chiram. What does he have to do with Adam HaRishon? Kol even yikara masukatecha. Okay, so basically saying to the king here, when Adam HaRishon was in Gan Eden, every precious stone was his sukkah, was covering him, protecting him. Odin pitidav yalom tarshish shon v'yashpeh sapir nofech uvarakat v'zahav. Okay, notice gold is last. We're going to get to that. And then there's these weird words that we're going to have to understand. Melechet tupecha. Okay, tupim are often drums, but maybe something else it means here. Unekavecha, and your holes. Bicha biyom hibaracha konanu. They were already created from the first day of creation. Okay, the tupim, which we're not sure what they are, and the nikevim, which are holes. We don't know what they are either. We'll get there. So that's the introduction to the section. So the first thing we're saying about this, Rabbi Chanina is saying, Rabbi Chanina, sorry, is saying, Eser chupot asa kadosh baruch hu la'adam harishon b'gan Eden. Adam HaRishon had 10 chupot, and they were made of all these 10 stones that we just read. Shneimar b'gan Eden elohim yita kol even yikara v'chulei. They don't redo the whole pasuk. That's why I read them with the list of the 10 stones. Marzutra says achatisrei. Shneimar kol even yikara. He says kol even yikara, precious stones. All the precious stones is not an introduction to that section. It's another one. All the precious stones is one, and then you have all the 10 listed. Okay, side debate. I'm a Rabbi Yochanan, and this is why we got here, because now comes Rabbi Yochanan also again. The garosh bekulan zahav. Okay, zahav is the worst of all them, meaning they're going to be so beautiful, these stones, or they were so beautiful, these stones, that gold is even the worst of all of them. Because how do you know that? Because it was the last one listed. And what does this have to do with Chira Melech Tzur is really also what they're asking. Amar lo kadosh baruch hu lechira melech tzur. Bechan istakalti. When I was creating the world, I looked into the future and I saw you were going to be created, and I saw your haughtiness. And because of that, barati nekavim ba'adam. That's why I made man, humans, with holes in them. Meaning, right? They have to excrete, which is kind of an unpleasant thing, and makes man look, not so great, more animal-like, you could say. And it's all because of you, because I saw the haughtiness and I said, well, I'm going to put you down right now so that we don't reach that, so that we don't have people that are so haughty like you. Some people say, turning now to Amabet, that it's because of you that I made man mortal. Now, this is interesting because, what do you mean? Wasn't it because of Chet Adam HaRishon? It's in the Torah. You can make a drasha and, say something that wasn't mentioned in the Torah. So the commentaries all ask about that. Anyway, so how do we get by this? To this, tupecha is, they would often play drums at people's funerals. So maybe that's a reference to the funerals. And the nekevecha are the holes in the ground that we make to bury people. And it's a reference to the fact that humans are mortal. And all because of the haughtiness. If they weren't so haughty, well, then maybe not. Okay, so again, how to reconcile that with the fact that the Torah says it was because of Chet Adam HaRishon. There are all different interpretations, but I'm going to leave that for right now. Okay, going back to a pasuk we mentioned before now, okay, because we got off on a tangent, but how did we start with this pasuk about the chupot that will be in the future, not in the past, which we just did as a tangent, but going back. Now, the pasuk said, Ubaral kol machon har Tzion, and I ignored this word at the first time, ve'al mikra'eha. What is mikra'eha? So those that are called to come in, like mikra, from being called. So on Jerusalem, and those who will be called to come in. So let's explain this pasuk. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo ki Yerushalayim shalom hazeh, Yerushalayim shalom haba. Okay, the Jerusalem of the future is not like the Jerusalem in the past. Yerushalayim shalom hazeh, like Jerusalem in our world. Anyone who wants to come to Jerusalem can come. But shalom haba, in the world to come, ein olim ela hamizumanim. You have to get invitation only. Okay, it's invitation only to get into Jerusalem of the heavens. Okay, the future Jerusalem. But now we're going to have a whole digression about, okay, we already started with this, about Jerusalem in the future. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Atidim, okay, besides this, we're now going to get on a small thing about the tzaddikim and Jerusalem, and this is why we're here, and the Mashiach. Atidim tzaddikim shenikreim al shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shene'amal, kol, this is a different pasuk from a different parak in Yeshayahu. All those who are called in my name, and I made for my glory. Now, who is that? Righteous people. So what do you see? The righteous people are called in the name of God. Not only the tzaddikim, but there's three that are called in God's name, three groups of people. Eluhen, tzaddikim, so the righteous people, the Mashiach, and Yerushalayim. So let's see this, how we get it. Tzaddikim hadam aram, we already just quoted you that pasuk, so we're not going to quote it again. Mashiach dichtiv v'zeh shmo asher yikru Hashem tzidkenu. It's a pasuk from Yirmiyahu, which is talking about the Mashiach, and it said, "This is his name that they will call him Hashem tzidkenu." He has the name of God in his name. Yerushalayim dichtiv sviv 18,000 v'shem ha'ir miyom Hashem shama. Okay, around it will be 18,000 cubits. Most people explain it's cubits. The word cubits is missing from the pasuk. What they're really talking about is Jerusalem in the future. We'll have these 18,000 cubits around it, which is huge. And the name of the city will be Miyom Hashem Shama. Al tikre Shama ela Shma. The name of it will be Hashem. Okay, the Jerusalem city of the future will be called in the name of God. By the way, this is why it's important to open the Tanakh. Okay, today it's a good lesson to learn in terms of the importance. You don't always have time, but it's really good when you open the Tanakh. First of all, I recommend, as I said before, to read chapters 40 and 41, at least skim them. It's hard to read chapters of Iyov, but just to get a sense, especially after learning today's daf, you'll skim, especially from the middle of chapter 40, and you'll see, oh, yeah, we just read a lot of these pasukim, not all of them, but a lot of them, and it will sound familiar. If you open this pasuk, this is the very last pasuk in Yechezkel, which is just interesting. So you would know that if you just saw it quoted here, but this last pasuk, it's describing Jerusalem in the future, and it ends with this pasuk. This is the very end. Okay, next. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Atidim tzadikim she'omrim lifnehem kadosh. Okay, now we're back to the tzadikim, and we're back to this pasuk. Okay, this is important to see. We read this pasuk before about the 7 chupot. It's from Yeshayahu chapter 4. 2 psukim before that, in verse 3, it says, "V'haya nish'al b'tzion v'notar b'Yerushalayim," the ones who will be left in Jerusalem and in Zion and in Jerusalem. This again tying in the future. Kadosh amerlo kol hakatuv l'chaim b'Yerushalayim. Anyone who is left, they will call those people kadosh. Now, what is that a reference to? Obviously, when do we call kadosh? Like in kedusha, right? And who says that? Well, kedusha was what the angels said in the time of the prophets. So some people say this time about the angels. Some people say it's time about people. But either which way, atidim tzadikim she'omrim lifnehem kadosh kaderech she'omrim lifnei kadosh. People are going to treat the tzaddikim, the righteous people, like they treat God. The same way either the angels or maybe people say kadosh to God, they're going to also say kadosh to the tzaddikim in the future, as it says in the pasuk, and then they quote this pasuk I just quoted, Vayan Yishar B'Tzion V'Notar B'Yerushalayim, kadosh amerlo. Kadosh will be said to them. Amar Rabba Yochanan. More statements about the future of Jerusalem. Atira kadosh baruch hu, and here we have exaggerated descriptions. Lahagbiat Yerushalayim shalosh parsa lamala. Okay, if I remember, a parsa is about 4 miles. Okay, for meal, which a meal in the Gemara is about a mile. So we're talking 12 miles high. It's going to be up in the sky, this future Jerusalem. Shenemar ve'rama v'yashvat tachtea. Rama means it will be lifted up and will sit underneath it. So how do they explain sit underneath it and how we get to 3 parsaot? My tachtea, pit tachtea. As it was below, okay, which is a debate. It was 3 parsaot long, perhaps, or is 3 parsaot high? Okay, we're not sure which this is talking about, but probably the length of Jerusalem in our world was 3 parsaot long, so the height of the new one will be 3 parsaot high. That's how they understand the tachteha. It will be like the tachteha, not that it will be underneath it. Umimaydai tachteha tzlata parseh. I mean, how do we know Jerusalem was 3 parsaot? Well, Amar Rabba, Amar Liyahu Saba, there was an elderly person who maybe remembered, I don't know, but he couldn't have lived in the time of Rabba and also in the time of the temple. Anyway, right, because Rabba is like around 300, I would guess, something like that. Lididi Chazele Yerushalayim Kamaita, but the elderly person said, I saw the original Jerusalem, Utzlata Parseh, and it was 3 parsaot. By the way, the original Jerusalem sounds like for Bayit Rishon even, which is obviously hundreds of years before. But maybe he had a vision. V'shema Tomar Yesh Tsar La'alot. Okay, but wait. We have this Jerusalem in the future. It's going to be 3 parsa high. It's going to be a little tough to get there. Well, Talmud Lomar Mi Ela Ka'avtu Fenaf Chayonim Ela Rubotehen. Maybe what they're talking about is in the future there'll be air travel, right? So you're going to fly there like on a cloud, and like birds fly to their. I'm not sure how they translate Rubotehen, but in any case, the idea being you're going to get there somehow miraculously. Amara Papa Shmamina Hai Eva Tlata Parse Midlay. Okay, what the meaning of this is, good question. But he's saying from here we learn this cloud they were talking about, that's going to basically, people are going to kind of fly in a cloud, was 3 parsaot high, and that's how we know. Some people say it means that was that, but most of them are lower. Or some people say, no, that's 3 parsaot, most of them are above that. I don't know the meaning of it. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. Now we're going to darshan some psukim from Zechariah. And what they're going to do is they're going to fill in a gap here of some sort of contradiction between two psukim. And they're going to say, well, it happened because of a conversation with God and the angels that God changed his mind a little bit. Okay, so Bomar, Zechariah says, Ana taholech. Okay, so someone says to him, where are you going? Vayomer Eli. And Zechariah asks this angel he sees, where are you going? And Vayomer Eli. And the angel says, Lamodik Yerushalayim. I'm going to measure Jerusalem. Or maybe it's like a vision of God he sees, And then he says, I'm going to measure Jerusalem. See what the length and the width is. Now stop, pasuk. That was the pasuk. I don't understand. The angel said, you've built many cities. You don't measure. They're not measured out, meaning once things are measured out, there's no room for growth. We want to have a big city. Jerusalem, where your name is on it, your temple is in it. But righteous people are in it. You're going to limit it. Miyad, and then next pasuk, Vayom Rutz daber al anar alas hazeh, prazot teshev Yerushalayim merov adam merov behema b'tocha. And then he said, go run and tell this lad that, Jerusalem is actually going to be open, okay? And because of the masses of people and animals that are going to come in it, and Jerusalem will not be limited. Amarish Lakish. And if we talk about the grandeur of Jerusalem, we're going to have all these statements now. 1,000 times of tefef of ginaot. I'll go with the simple explanation that most people say the tefef is gematria. There are some who explain it otherwise. All this is meant is to give a number. 1,000 times this number of ginaot. And some people say, where do you get to these numbers? Because he saw a city with that number of gardens. So he said Jerusalem's going to have 1,000 times that city's garden number. Elef kefel migdalim. Again, kefel is just used for the gematria, the numeric value of the word, of towers. Elef litzoi. Again, litzoi just for numeric values. Biraniot. If you want, you could calculate the numeric values. I'm not going to go through them all. Of fortifications. Elef ushne. I don't know why this one is 1,002 times. Shiloh, which is again the numeric value of totafraot, which is small houses. So it's going to have 1,000 times like any city you imagine. 1,000 times there are towers, 1,000 times gardens, etc. Each one is like Tzipori in its grandeur. Tzipori was known to be the most beautiful city of their time. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Ani ra'iti Tzipori b'shalvata. I saw Tzipori in its days of glory. There were 180,000 markets in Tzipori. Okay, again, exaggeration, that sold, and I'd forget about all the other things they sold. There were 180,000 markets that sold this sauces for meat. Okay, Sikei Ktera is like the bottom of the Ktera, where they would like all the spices kind of collect there, and they would scrape them and then make a sauce out of it. Okay, Atzlaot Sela Shalosh Shloshim Pamim. Now this is a pasuk we saw in the beginning of our section, which was really the previous chapter. Remember? And then they say the Yitzia, Ta, and Sela are all the same. When we quoted these psukim about the future Jerusalem from Yechezkel, now we're quoting them again. So what's this shalosh shloshim pa'amim? In other words, all these chambers were going to be 3 by 30 and 30 times, like 33 times. What does this mean? My shalosh shloshim pa'amim. We're going to have two ways of darshaning it. Amar Rabbi Levi, Amar Papi Mishum Rabbi Yeshua Desichni. Im shalosh Yerushalayim. If the future Jerusalem is 3 times the Jerusalem of now, kol echad ve'echad yesh ba shlosha medorim lamala. It can be 3 times the length, but 30 times the height. And if we do it the reverse, im shloshim Yerushalayim. If we're going to multiply it by 30 of Jerusalem today in terms of length, it can be 3 stories higher also. So either which way, it's going to be 3 times 30 times greater. It's just a matter which is height and which is length. Itmar. Okay, we're done. That's the end of our section of our stories. Okay, now we just have one last section. We're going to get back to, let's say, regular Gemara, you can call it, and back to our Mishnah. So again, the main message in my mind of these stories is about the haughtiness. And I mentioned already in yesterday's daf about the idea that perhaps it's here because it's all about selling. And selling means, again, we did say that selling means you don't have money, but people who are buying certainly have money, and maybe also the sellers have money and get arrogant about their sales and their profits. And here's a message of, remember that everything comes from God. So perhaps that's the connection here. Okay, with that, we're going to get started back on our daf, on our topic, Itma, Svina. The question is, how do you acquire a boat? Rav Amar, kevan shemashach koshu kana. As long as you pull the boat a little bit, you acquire it. Because again, you can't lift it. So without lifting, you do mashicha, like with the animals. And in a minute, we'll get to that comparison. Shmuel Amar lo kanad shim shochet kula. You have to move it completely, meaning if it takes up 10 feet, okay, you have to move it 10 feet forward. So no part of it is in the space where it was before. You have to move it completely. So we have this machlokah Rav and Shmuel. Rav says a bit, Shmuel says a lot. Lema ketanai. Let's suggest that this is the same as a machlokah between Tanaim. How so? How do you acquire an animal by handing it over? You hold it by its hoof. Okay, like it's not just I take it, but we were having a sale. You said I'm selling you this, and then I just pulled it. I held it on its hoof. It's like as if you pass the reins over to me. This part of Masira is irrelevant. B'sala, or on its hair, or b'ukaf shala, or the saddle, or b'shlif shala, or on the load that was on it. B'prum yashab'pia, on the bit that was in its mouth. B'zug shabetzabara, or on the bell that was on its neck. Kina'a, you acquire it. Ketzab mishicha. How do you do mishicha by an animal? Kore laviba. You can call the animal after we agreed on the sale. I say come, and the animal comes. Oikishab makel v'ratzal fanav. I hit it with a stick, and it starts moving, or prod it with a stick. Kevan she'akra yad v'regel kina'a. Now, at what point of them moving? They have to lift a hand and a leg, which really means like a hind and a back leg, hind and a back, right? Like move one of the front, one in the back. Or maybe even just two altogether. I'm not sure if it has to be front, back. I didn't pay attention. Rabbi Achai, Rabbi Achai, but there's a different opinion. It's not enough to just lift its hand and leg. It has to actually move the length of the height of its body. So if the height is 1 cubit or 5 cubits, then it has to move 5 cubits. So it sounds very much like the same machloket. Lema Rav, who says a little bit, Lema Tanakama. So it holds like Tanakama here, just a little bit. And Lema and Shmuel, Amar Rabbi Acha, to which we're going to say no. Amar Lecha Rav, Ana Amar Afilu Rabbi Acha. Rav could say, even though I think by a boat it's a little bit, by the animal I require more. Why? Because Akan Lo Kamar Rabbi Acha, Ela Bapa Lechayim. To Afagav de Akra Yav Regel B'Duchta Kaima. If you just lift 2 legs, you're not going to move there at all. You're still in the same exact place. But if you move a boat, the whole boat moved. You can't move part and the other part stays in place, right? With an animal, you could lift 2 legs, but the rest of the body's in the same place. It didn't actually move. So it could be that Rav would agree with Rabbi Achai when it comes to the animal. And Shmuel Amar, and this is our last line for today, I would agree even with Tanakama here. Once it picks up 2, it's already on the move. It's clearly going to lift up another 2, so it's obvious that it's moving. Whereas a boat, but a boat, you move a little bit, it might just stop. But in theory, he agrees everything has to move completely. But the animal, once it lifts 2, it's already on the way, and it obviously will get there. Whereas the boat might just stop and it'll never move, and then that's a problem. So we tried to say it was a machloket tanaim. It's not. We're going to continue, though, bring other machloket tanaims to try other tannaitic debates and say perhaps Rav and Shmuel are arguing like this one. So we'll get to that tomorrow, and that's it for today's daf. Wishing everyone a Shavua Tov.